going on, folks? Welcome to episode 4 of the Next Man Up Injury Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Allen, joined once again by the talented duo of Matthew Walters and Erik. This episode was supposed to be a special one and mark the very first time that we were going to simultaneously record and broadcast the podcast live on Twitter. Per usual, I found technical difficulties. I am far from a technical wizard. I usually get my wife to set up my new phones and computers and things of that nature. So our apologies if you're looking forward to that. I hope to get it up next week. Anyways, so Erik, Matthew and I had the pleasure of reading over your latest article a little bit ahead of time before anybody else got the chance to. Now it's live at writerdynasty.com for everyone to see. Tell us a little bit about it.
That write-up is one of my pride and joys, and I had a lot of fun writing it. It started as a point of interest during some trade negotiations as I was about to acquire Saquon, and it ended just as a total love affair with my PT brain and appreciation for rehab outcomes. And it doesn't hurt that we were able to include some commentary on Courtland Sutton. What was happening was I was trying to find an answer to the question, how will Saquon Barkley do in his first year back, in his second year back, and, what's his career outlook going to look like? And there are a few articles out there that try to answer the question, but the problem I was seeing was that they just generally compare running back outcomes after ACL injury, and that's fine, but that was just my starting point for this write-up. My question was specifically, how will Saquon Barkley perform after ACL? And he's different from most athletes. So I think it came out great, and we got the answer we needed, so I encourage you all to take a look.
It's always nice when you have something that you suspect going into writing an article, and the further you dive into it, the more it supports your ideas. On top of that, it was an incredible piece. You guys should check it out. It is called Crank the ACL. It's about Saquon Barkley's recovery and his expectations moving forward. You changed my mind about it, Erik. I am excited for the Saquon train.
We're back on board.
Now, we won't delay the action too much more, but before we start discussing the NFC North, there are some congratulations in order to our very own Matthew Walters, who recently popped the question and got engaged. Congratulations, dude.
Woo!
Tell us how it went down.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've been, me and my now fiance, we've been dating for almost more than 4 years now. We had gone to do a picnic at the park, and we were going to do little paintings afterwards. So I did a little painting that said, "Will you marry me?" and then showed her and had her take the ring, and of course she said yes, and now we're starting the process of planning a wedding, so that's fun.
Now all the fun begins. Well, congratulations again. Now, Erik, if you and I don't get an invite, we have to crash this thing, right?
Rule number 1, never leave a fellow crasher behind.
I'm glad I'm not solo on this. Well, since none of you are listening to this live as we had planned, if you want to hear any of our previous 2 divisional breakdowns before you dive into this one, you can go back on writerdynasty.com and follow the podcast link to check out our breakdowns of the NFC East and West. As you may have put together, we're going through taking a look at each division's most fantasy relevant injuries from last year and breaking down how they may affect the fantasy landscape moving forward. Today, we are discussing the NFC North. We'll go in order of their finish for last season. So kicking things off, we have the NFC North champion, Green Bay Packers. Fortunately for Green Bay, there's not much injury news to talk about in terms of fantasy-relevant players. But one injury that had a trickle-down effect highlighted in the NFC Championship was David Bakhtiari's torn ACL that he suffered prior to the regular season finale against Chicago. Aaron Rodgers was sacked 5 times in the NFC Championship. Obviously, this is a stretch because there isn't a ton to cover for Green Bay. But Erik, do you look at the health of offensive lines if you're drafting after minicamps or even after preseason games?
I do, actually. I'm a Washington football fan, and our offensive line is traditionally decimated. And so I could tell you for sure that if you don't have the depth of quality starters to start the season, then it has a serious impact through a lot of games. I mean, experience and continuity are crucial at the offensive line position, so that matters to me when I look at running backs. I think that the Steelers are a great example from last year, where they couldn't get anything going, and they totally abandoned the running game, and that sucked for James Conner shareholders. Now, I'm not saying that I value offensive line health over running back talent, but it's something that I consider as I go through my process.
Good to know I'm not the only psychopath that looks way too far into things like that.
Reading the tea leaves.
Right. Matthew, with that being said, how far into his recovery is Bakhtiari, and when can we expect the Packers O-line to be back to 100%?
So all the reports that I've seen are that David Bakhtiari's making good progress for his ACL injury. Now, it did happen right at the end of the year, which kind of put his surgery most likely in January. I was having trouble finding an exact date, but it was in that January, like late December, January, early January range. Put him at about 6-7 months now, which means that he's kind of should be working into kind of advanced plyometrics, sport-specific agility. However, that is going to put his timetable to actually get back at the first of the year in question. Because as we've discussed with other ACL injuries and stuff like that, usually it's 9 months at the soonest and it's 9 months to a year. We will see. All the reports are that he's making great progress. We will see how much more he can make, but I would doubt that he'll be back at the beginning of the year, and it'll probably be more October-ish before he's back on the field.
Well, thanks for that. It sounds like he's at the point where most athletes, I'm thinking of OBJ when I say this, but most athletes are posting videos on Twitter of them running and jumping for the first time, and everybody gets excited, and then we got to wait 4 or 5 more months.
Yeah, I don't typically get too excited about seeing someone run in a straight line following their ACL surgery. I want to see them cutting and doing stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thankfully for Bakhtiari, he does not have to do too much running and cutting. Let's move across the division to Chicago and discuss Bears rookie wide receiver Dazz Newsome. He's not off to the best start after breaking his clavicle in OTAs. Matthew, will come back to you. What can we expect in terms of recovery and his readiness for the season?
He should be good to go by really training camp. He broke it June 2nd, and he did have surgery to repair it, which basically means they went in, most likely put a plate on it. Typically that puts it at about 8 weeks recovery. Sometimes it's a little sooner. I actually found a study that the reason they do the surgery is because, one, it typically heals sooner. However, the long-term strength and range of motion, there's really no effect on doing the surgery versus not doing the surgery. It reduces the risk of having non-union, which basically means it's failing to heal together. They most likely went in, put on a plate to absolutely make sure there's going to be no questions that his clavicle fully heals.
Yeah, when your brand new toy breaks down, you want to get it fixed as soon as possible. Now let's talk about Tariq Cohen. He's arguably one of the best pass-catching running backs and return men in the game right now. He missed the majority of last season with a torn ACL. Erik, can we expect Cohen to be back in form in 2021?
This is a good way to use my Saquon article as a tool to evaluate other players. Let me just start by saying that you have to be a really special player to fully recover from this injury in the way that fantasy players hope, especially in year one. In my article, we identify 4 things that we know matter in a running back's ability to return from the ACL injury. And that would be draft capital, pre-operation production levels, preserving your meniscus, and finally rehab time since injury. I mean, a short answer would be that he probably misses 3 out of these 4 marks. But if you want more background on, how we come to that conclusion or where he stacks up compared to other running backs with this injury, then you should peep the article on riderdynasty.com.
Shameless plug. That was excellent.
I'll do it anytime I can.
It's cool to see it applied. I appreciate it. Anybody else from the Bears that we feel like we need to talk about? It's a good problem to not have a lot of injuries to talk about. I'm sure we will have more during the season, but it'd be great if we didn't. Next up, we have the Minnesota Vikings. Let's start off with a little something different in Minnesota and talk IDP. Now, Danielle Hunter missed the entire season last year recovering from a herniated cervical disc, which is in your neck for those that are not hip with the lingo. He underwent a subsequent surgery to remedy the situation. Now, Matthew, with this sort of injury, are we looking at a long road of increased worry and risk, or are we moving on with no more concerns for Hunter?
Initially, when I saw this injury and started looking into it, I was quite worried. Basically, he had a herniated cervical disc, meaning his intervertebral disc in his cervical spine, like you said, that's your neck, was jutting out and putting pressure on a nerve, and it caused him to miss all last season. Now, that sounds scary, especially when you start throwing in that he had surgery to repair it and going from there. However, looking into the surgery, it's actually not uncommon for football players to have this surgery and then return to pre-surgery form. I read a study that they looked at 53 players. Now, part of them had cervical herniations and part of them had lumbar herniations. But the ones that had cervical herniations, actually 67% of them return to pre-surgery form. There shouldn't be any issues going forward, and he's actually not on the injury report as of this summer, and they're saying he's completely healthy. So I'm thinking he's going to be good to go, perfectly fine, really no issues going forward.
Well, that's encouraging for both Vikings fans and for those of us that have Hunter on our IDP squad. Erik, you hold the keys to the Dalvin Cook mobile in our Rider Dynasty Riders League. SportsInjuryPredictor.com is projecting Cook to miss 3 games next season and ranks him 5th with an 87% probability of injury next season. That's 5th among running backs. While I'll reserve my personal opinions on stats like that, as Dynasty manager, do you believe that Dalvin Cook's injury history makes him more difficult to trade?
I'm not naming names here, but I know I sent out a trade to one of our writers in the league offering Dalvin Cook, and the trade was quickly denied. But no, I don't think that it was because of his injury history. Dalvin is a top 4 back in an elite tier of productive fantasy players. And he's getting a little bit older, but I don't think his injury dings here and there impact my ability to trade him, because you'll always want him when he's healthy. He's bona fide.
Yeah, he's definitely not a player that you can leave on your bench if he's healthy. Although he has yet to play a full season in the NFL. Anywho, moving on to discuss the Detroit Lions. We're going to go back to the defensive side of the ball. Last season, the Lions took Jeff Okudah out of Ohio State with the 3rd overall pick. He ended up missing time due to a shoulder injury and then elected to undergo a groin surgery, which effectively ended his season. Can you give us an update on Okudah and what we can expect out of him in 2021, Erik?
His injury has been hard to track because athletes' exact health information isn't always out there for everyone to see and make a judgment call on. I've seen it called a groin injury. Jeff himself called it a core muscle injury. It makes me think that he had some sort of like an athletic pubalgia or a sports hernia. And these things are caused by a repetitive overload and are aggravated by sudden acceleration, deceleration, twists, turns, and cuts. Pretty much anything that you need to do to be a top level athlete. They really suck, but a lot of players can play through them. It's just a matter of how severe it is. The real trick about it is that symptoms won't improve with rest. So if you're mid-season with a severe enough injury like this, then you're kind of screwed. That's what I think happened with Jeff Okudah, and he elected to have surgery in December during the season. The only concrete point that we can read into is his commentary that he wasn't at 100%, is what he said in his recent comments in May. And that's around 5 months since the surgery. So, obviously looking ahead, there's a few months before the actual season begins. But I think that they'll rotate him in slowly. And by sort of like the first quarter, mid-season range, Lions fans should see the player that they got excited about on draft day.
So if you're somebody that sets your lineup and likes to look at receiver cornerback matchups like me, is he somebody that you look at and you have concern for your wide receiver lining up against, or not yet?
No, I mean, generally I play my studs no matter what, but I think that if he was at his top level athleticism, knowing the caliber of cornerback that he is, I think that if I had a tiebreaker between 2 wide receivers, then I might shy away from someone like Jeff Okudah, if I could.
Yeah, he hasn't shown me enough yet that I'm really worried about him, but he's certainly the best cornerback in Detroit right now, and he's going to be covering a lot of very talented wide receivers, so it will be very interesting to see how that injury affects him this season.
Yeah, he's good.
So this division was not exactly laced with injury news. We've covered all the teams and all the players that we had written down that we wanted to talk about, but I did notice something interesting that all 4 of these teams had in common. Each of them drafted a player at both wide receiver and running back this season. To look back at it, the Lions took Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamar Jefferson. The Vikings took Amir Smith-Marset and Kenny Nwangwu. The Bears took Dazz Newsome and Khalil Herbert. And the Packers took Amari Rodgers and Kylan Hill. So after figuring out this commonality amongst the 4 teams in the NFC North, I figured we should play a little game. At Rider Dynasty, we base our rankings off of a 3-year period. So we'll stick with a 3-year period. In the next 3 years, I want to hear which of these duos you guys think will be the best and which you think will be the worst from a fantasy perspective. Now, Matthew, who you got for your worst duo?
The worst? This is going to be hard to choose.
This is a stupid game.
All of them?
All of the above? No, but in all seriousness, there's really only maybe 1 or 2 players on this list that I actually want. I know we talked about Dazz Newsome a little bit earlier with his clavicle injury, but I don't really see him being fantasy relevant. Khalil Herbert's probably not going to be fantasy relevant, and neither of the Vikings players are going to probably be fantasy relevant. So I would say it's a tie for me on the worst team between Amir Smith-Marset and Kene Nwangwu, and Dazz Newsome and Khalil Herbert.
Alrighty, so you're giving it a tie between Minnesota and Chicago. Erik, in 3 years, who do you think is going to be the worst duo out of these?
Well, Matt cheated. He picked 2.
If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
But
I'm the judge. I'll let it slide. Continue.
I think. Okay. I think that if we're thinking about what they did in college and then the competition that they're going to be facing from the existing starters on their team, I think the Vikings have to be at the bottom. I mean, I don't know. At some point, Adam Thielen will reach that veteran cliff, but I don't think Dalvin Cook's going anywhere. Justin Jefferson isn't going anywhere. I think it's going to be really tough for those two to make an impact. But honestly, I kind of feel the same with the Lions. I might, if I'm picking 2, I might pick the Lions over the Bears. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamar Jefferson, because Jamar Jefferson, he's not overtaking DeAndre Swift. And I don't really have a rationale for Amon-Ra, but I just don't think he's that good.
The Debbie Dirtbag Ryan might come after you on that Amon-Ra take.
Bring it.
If I had to pick one who I think would flop out of all of these, I'd probably go with the Bears, just based off of the questions in that offense. Obviously, Justin Fields is going to be very different, and it's hopefully going to spell good things in Chicago. But I don't know if Dazz Newsome's going to be the one for them. I can certainly see them signing Allen Robinson after this year and figuring out his contract stuff. But if they don't, he's got a chance to be relevant. So we'll see. In a 3-year span, it's going to be tough. All right, let's look at it from the other side. Who's going to be the best duo out of these in the next 3 years? Matthew, who you got?
Duos themselves, I don't think there's actually a duo that hits that both players on any of these teams will be fantasy relevant. The ones I'm actually looking at are Amari Rodgers on the Packers and the sun god himself, Amon-Ra St. Brown, on the Lions.
No.
I'm leaning towards Amon-Ra because I actually did like his talent coming out and his skill set, and there's really no one competing with him in the Lions. He could be their number 1 receiver as a rookie by default. Just who else are you going to throw the ball to there? So if I had to choose,
that much is true.
I'm picking the Lions, but really I'm picking Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that's not saying that I think he's going to be a fantasy stud by any means, but compared to every other name on this list, yeah.
All right, Erik, who you got here? Who's your best duo in the next 3 years?
If I had to choose, it would be the Packers duo. I really like what Amari Rodgers brings to the table. I think he could easily slide into the Randall Cobb role. And I think that what we're seeing is the Packers coaching staff creating an offensive unit that they want to start in the near future. And I don't know what their grand scheme is. I think a lot of people are curious also, but I think that Amari Rodgers has the opportunity to thrive. And you never know with Kylan Hill. I mean, he's one injury away from a decent amount of touches. I'd probably leave it there, to be honest.
Yeah, if I had to pick a duo out of here, I would probably go with the Packers as well. I love Aaron Jones. If you've followed me for any amount of time, that is not a surprise to you. So I don't think Kylan Hill will overtake him, but with Jamal Williams leaving in free agency, I personally feel like Kylan Hill might fill in that role. I know there's a lot of people that are high on A.J. Dillon, but I don't think he's at all the same player as Jamal Williams. Yeah, that's where I go there. And then Amari Rodgers, I mean, he's going to fill in as the wide receiver too there behind Devontae Adams. And I know Aaron Rodgers has been disgruntled with the front office in Green Bay for quite a while now. And I feel like part of that is that they haven't been getting him any wide receiver help outside of Devontae Adams that has produced anything. And I think Amari Rodgers may be the guy that's going to step up and do that.
Does y'all's answers change at all if Aaron Rodgers actually does do the unthinkable and says, nope, I'm not playing?
Well, for me, no. I mean, I think that obviously it's a huge downgrade at quarterback, but I think yet they have a wild card at Jordan Love, who was drafted in the first round, and I think that they have a fantasy-capable Blake Bortles. You never know.
I love your confidence in Bortles, but
he is
not.
He was a fantasy stud 1 year.
Yeah.
1 year. Yeah, in Dynasty, I'm not too hot on him. If I have to spot start somebody because all of my quarterbacks are hurt, I would probably flex a kicker instead. But
if you were in a pinch and you had Blake Bortles and Aaron Rodgers is not playing, Bortles might be a good move.
If he can beat out Jordan Love, he's supposed to be the second coming of Pat Mahomes.
Yeah, and everyone is the second coming of Tyreek Hill.
That's right. All right, pick two. They don't have to be on the same team. One receiver, one running back. Who are your two sleepers?
I would go Dazz Newsome. And you convinced me, Kyle. I will say Kylan Hill. I think that Mooney is a very good and capable wide receiver, but I think that there's a chance that he gets more competition than sleepy Anthony Miller, and that could be Dazz Newsome when healthy. So you never know. Dazz could just fill in as the wide receiver 3 role, but even if he does that, he could be a contributor in some deeper leagues. And I thought that your logic for Kylan Hill was sound.
That may be the first time anybody has ever agreed with my logic.
Thank
you for that ego inflation. Matthew, who are your two sleepers here?
Yeah, for running back, I would agree, Kylan Hill. Just because, while I do like Aaron Jones, as I know you do as well, Kyle, I'm actually not super sold on A.J. Dillon myself, but there's a chance Kylan Hill works his way into that rotation. And as far as a sleeper at receiver, I would say Amari. I mean, I'm going with the two from the Packers, I guess. I'd say Amari Rodgers, because there is a chance he kind of maybe steps in and does have that Randall Cobb role from years ago that he steps in and can do a little something. He is very speedy, but I mean, like I said, I'm not holding my breath for any of the players we just talked about.
Alrighty, fair enough. If I've got to pick two sleepers, both of them are coming out of Minnesota for me, actually.
Oh.
Amir Smith-Marset, hear me out here. Obviously, Justin Jefferson is the wide receiver 1 in Minnesota, but Thielen's aging. I can see a world where, especially in Dynasty, when we're looking at a 3-year period, I can see him stepping up and being the wide receiver 2 there within the next year or two.
Ooh.
And I'm taking Kenny Nwangwu as my sleeper running back. I'm trying to pick him up at the very end of drafts because a lot of people aren't drafting him. Because if you look at the depth chart in Minnesota, obviously Dalvin Cook has a stranglehold on the RB1. But we've already discussed his injury history. And then after that, you've got Alexander Mattison, who will have like one hot week as a backup. Everybody will pick him up on waivers, and then he just disappears. Does not really do much for you. And then Amir Abdullah, not really a fantasy asset in my book. So I feel like Nwangwu could have an opportunity to work into an RB2 role in Minnesota. Not necessarily on your fantasy squad, but he could be the RB2 there and be in line for a good workload if anything happens with Cook.
Wow.
Nwangwu is an athletic freak as well.
I take back my compliment on your sound logic.
I have no logic. Ask JJ. Well, folks, that does it for the NFC North and this episode of the Next Man Up Injury Podcast. Next time, we will wrap up the NFC by taking on the NFC South and what can be expected in 2021 from the Buccaneers, Saints, Falcons, and Panthers. As always, we'll close it out with our social tags. Matthew, where can we find you?
You can mostly find me on Twitter at Fantasy Ferret. That's my fantasy football account that I just like to go to and talk a lot of nonsense with people.
The good kind of nonsense every time. And Erik, where can the listeners find you?
I am the Nighthawk PT. You can find me at FF_Nighthawk on Twitter.
Before I sign off, we need to give a shout out to a personal friend of mine and friend of the podcast, John C., for creating all of our intro and outro music.
Thank you, John.
If you're looking for music for your podcast, videos, or just need to hear some sweet tunes, you can reach out to him, jonseemusic@gmail.com. That's JONSEE music@gmail.com. Don't go emailing some other John C. with an H in his name. We tried it, and that guy is not cool. My name is Kyle Allen. You can find me on Twitter at KAllen_4. And don't forget to check out RiderDynasty.com for the latest from our treasure trove of riders. And give us a follow on Twitter at RideOrDynasty. And one last thing before we go. Always remember that the best ability is availability. Peace.
Adios.